Recording. All right, folks. Well, thank you for your patience and welcome again to another exciting Lunch GPT session. In my opinion, there's no better way to spend a Friday at lunchtime or 9 a.m. for all you West Coasters than learning about the law and AI. And today we are very, very fortunate to have Mark Williams with us. So we're going to be talking a lot about legal services, legal education, and in particular, the Vanderbilt AI Law Lab. But before we get into the nitty gritty, which I think is going to be quite fascinating, just a couple mention or a quick mention of some points that I hope you all will consider. One would be if you're on X, and I know X isn't the platform of choice for everyone these days, but if you're on X, please give us a follow at LunchGPT. You can stay tuned for updates on speakers, articles, and things like that. An alternative would be to join us on our Google group or 6 p.m. Thank you for the Euro crew. Awesome to see that we've got some Europeans here. Thank you, Emmy. Um, if you don't want to be on X, please consider joining our Google group. We'd love to have you there as well. And then finally, even though we only have one more session for the year ahead of us, after the summer, we're going to kick things off again. So if you'd like to get more involved with planning Lunch GPT sessions, reaching out to speakers, helping identify good articles, please give me an email. We welcome your assistance. So with those out of the way, and one other final thing I'll point to is that we are going to send out our registration link for the next Lunch GPT session, which will be next Friday at 12 p.m. After this recording. Okay, enough of the administrative items. Let's get into our session. So we've already covered just about the intro here, so thanks for sticking with me. Now we get to the good part, the interview with Mark Williams, and we'll have some time at the end for sure for audience questions. That said, we can keep this pretty informal. If you are really eager to ask a question, I know it can be a little frustrating to have to wait 45 minutes to ask that burning question. So feel free to either raise your hand via that function, or if you just want to come off mute and interrupt me. I'm a professor, so I'm more than used to being interrupted mid-sentence. And so I welcome that. And otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. So Mark, before we get to the origin story of, is it VAILL? Do you like VAILL? Okay, good. VAILL.
Yeah, we kind of naturally fell into calling it VAILL. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, can you first just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're coming from, and how the heck you got into this to begin with.
Yeah. So it's kind of a long and winding road. And I see Rebecca Forden is here as well, who I don't know if I've met person, but she's a fellow law librarian. So like law librarians have always been in this sort of intersection of law and technology. I have taught legal tech courses for 10 years. And that's not unusual. If you're at a law school and they have a law and tech course somewhere, there's usually a law librarian involved there somewhere. And so I've always had a unit or two on AI as part of that course. It's always been, the course would change over time, but AI or some component of it would always be there. And even, 4 or 5 years ago, I would bring in data scientists from here at Vanderbilt, and we would look at early versions of these large language models. We would look at the kind of BERT, which is one of the first ones, GPT-1, GPT-2, and they were fun. And they could, if they gave a coherent response to one basic legal question, that seemed like really cool and profound. But it was kind of a party trick. You couldn't iterate, you couldn't follow up. It was brittle, as most of these sort of AI systems out in the wild when you don't, at least for as far as the large language model sort of scenarios where that's kind of how it went. But certainly interesting. But through that, I got kind of to have a unique window into this technology and sort of, it was these sort of slow iterations of improvements over the last 4 or 5 years since, 2017 on really, when the transformer architecture started coming out. And then I'm going to teach my class in January of 2023. And so ChatGPT had been out since, November 2022. Clearly during that time, like the students, ChatGPT comes out, the 3.5 model, as we call it, comes out. They take their finals, they go away for basically a month, right? And then they come back in January 2023. It was just clear during that month that the students had been playing with ChatGPT. And suddenly, like, whether I liked it or not, that 1 or 2 unit sort of course, 1 or 2 unit sort of module in my course, like I was teaching a AI course in that moment, whether I was prepared to or not. And I saw it for myself, like even ChatGPT, the 3.5 version, this was before GPT-4 came out. Like I just through that iterative process of the previous years, I sort of just intuitively was like, this is like a exponentially sort of huge leap over what we had seen before. Was it perfect? No, it was still, kind of a maniacal liar. It was fun for writing poetry. It would, very sort of confidently hallucinate cases, but that was almost beside the point. Like this was like I just had a window into like we leapt from here to there, and suddenly, and then GPT-4 comes out in March, and it was another exponential leap. And so that's what I was focused on at that time. My students, honestly, I was very sort of encouraged, even in those early days, seemed to, more so than maybe practicing attorneys who would eventually go on to get in big trouble using ChatGPT in its sort of augmented form. My students, through our conversations, and we were kind of teaching each other in those moments, intuitively did seem to understand that this was something that could get you so far as like a document, like it gets you 50 to 75% of the way to a good document, but it wasn't meant to be the final endpoint. It was still, we were using it for more creative, augmented ways of enhancing our expertise, not using it as a replacement for learning, which kind of set the groundwork for how we would still to explore these tools to this day. So that was going on. At that same time, the dean of our law school, Chris Guthrie, he sits on some nonprofit board, but he was at a board meeting there, and one of the other board members was describing to him so either Harvey or K6, which had not come out of stealth at that time, but somebody had seen it and was telling him about it. That, yeah, well, I've seen this tool. It's built on this model. It's doing like, associate level, like first year associate level memo drafting, which just, you have to mean none of us had seen this before. This was all just like somebody who had signed an NDA probably was like, I've seen this thing and it's pretty impressive. And from that moment forward, our dean sort of queried myself, my co-director, Kat Moon, other people who sort of work in this area at the law schools, like, well, what can we do to be sort of proactive about thinking about this, embracing it, adopting it, critically evaluating it? Just what can we do to be forward about this? Which our dean, to his credit, is always thinking that way, and this was that next step. So we're very blessed here at Vanderbilt that it didn't take any convincing for the top of the administration down. In fact, it came from the top of the administration. So from that moment, we organized in May, about this time last year, a 2-day, almost like 6-hour boot camp for our faculty. And just kind of showing what the technology is, how it was different from other forms, where we might be headed. So GPT-4 had come out by that point, and I had a free trial to co-counsel at that time, so I was able to show them co-counsel. And I will never forget doing that workshop, because it would, like, we're all law people, and we're and law professors, so people who have been there since for 40 years, who have seen it all, not technology forward people. This was like everybody was here, and just the like audible like gasps that I would hear and the looks on people's faces when we were showing them what these tools could do, even basic things. I will never forget that. And we still at that time, the hallucination cases had not come out yet. Like that had not happened yet. But we in that room, we were kind of talking about this is what it is, this next word prediction. This is like why it might hallucinate. We were all kind of anticipating, like, well, this is only a matter of time for somebody does do this, right? And I think like a week later, the Schwartz, Mata via Bianca case like came out. Like it was like perfect timing because we were kind of discussing in this workshop, like, well, this will happen. Uh, and sure enough, it did. So from that point forward, we formed a working group over the summer, and through that kind of came what is now VAILL, where we sort of being more intentional about, we already have, what we found with VAILL is we already have a lot of pieces in place. We were already teaching courses. We launched another AI and legal practice course, uh, kind of alongside that at the same time, that sort of can constitute a curriculum that goes everything from very basic, this is how the technology works, these are the use cases, these are the risks, these are the limitations, this is how to critically evaluate it. Very basic sort of prompt engineering type stuff, all the way up to more sort of policy concerns and like how do we regulate AI agents and where and in the law and so that is the goal, and it's still very much an ongoing goal, but to very much run the gamut from very practical AI for law and law of AI all the way through. And we're very blessed here at Vanderbilt too that we just launched or will launch a new college of connected computing that will be very AI focused, but we have a lot of partnerships with computer science, with political science, with AI ethics folks across campus that we are, I think, able to provide our students for those who are seeking it out, a very immersive experience that ranges again from the basic to the more policy sort of ethical questions. But at a baseline for our school, we want to help educate and create the next generation of students that are going to be making a lot of the policy choices about how these tools get used, and have a comfortable sort of baseline for how to use them and how not to use them. And what we also, I talk about a lot, just learning how to learn about it. So, half of what we cover as far as like, well, what's a good prompt and what's not a good prompt, and this tool, you push this button and that button and it'll give you this, like that all like shelf life goes away fast because this stuff changes so quickly. So much more interested in what are the frameworks for critical evaluation and continued learning and curiosity going forward than can I download this and have it be emailed to me? Like that's cool, but like that's so we try to cover both, and that's a long, winding road saying like that's how we've gotten to where we are today.
Well, it's an impressive story. I mean, and I think the thing that stands out most to me is you all have a culture of embracing emerging technology there that is not to deride our profession, but not characteristic of the legal profession generally to say, oh boy, there's new technology, let's harness it and bring it into our practice. And seeing that kind of funny chicken and egg situation where you had students pressuring you to say, hey, we need to learn about this. What are you all going to do about it?
Yeah,
And having that top down mentality really seems like it was the perfect storm of creating this great opportunity for you all. And also just seeing that you all have continued to run with it and think about how are we going to make this a long-term part of our law school community is something that I'd anticipate other students are asking, why don't I have this at my school? How do I get this at my institution? And I guess one thing I would just quickly love to learn a little bit more about, did you have, and you don't have to name names, obviously, when you were going through that practice of just demonstrating the capacities and limitations of these tools to the professors to begin with, Was there some hesitancy? Was there some pushback to say, no, let's just stick with the way we've taught our students from time in memoriam. We don't want to embrace this quite yet. Or was it a pretty uniform adoption, a willingness to experiment?
At least in that room, I mean, people were definitely afraid of it. But I think part of what was so powerful about it is the inevitability of it. That like even if you thought short of like banning laptops, like there's no what we tried to demonstrate is like, yeah, it's a chatbot now, but like this is a technology that's about to be infused in sort of every aspect of computing. Maybe not in the next 1 to 2 years. I think we tend to overestimate the impact of these technologies in the immediate future, but then we underestimate what it'll look like in 10 years. And that's what I was trying to demonstrate is like this isn't just about like logging on to ChatGPT and asking it a question. This is, going to be infused in every sort of piece of computing that we have to the point where, maybe we don't necessarily think about it anymore, but we have to think about like the policy choices and the human aspects of what it means for our profession when these tools are doing a lot of the things that we train our students on now. What does that mean? So I think everybody got that. That doesn't mean we all just started like, implementing ChatGPT into our classes. And I am for one, am like, in some ways, I became away feeling stronger that a lot of the basics of the way we teach sort of doctrinal stuff it's more important than ever because the best and highest use of these tools is when you're operating at an expert level. So we're here to, especially the first and second year, there are courses like mine where we're very much intentionally here. This is the sandbox. Let's play around. Let's experiment. But there are other, like, how do you know to trust output of a large language model's research memo if you haven't written research memos and know what a good research memo looks like? Or Pablo Arredondo from K6 always talks about this too. Like this, sometimes like thinking is writing, and you don't want to give up thinking. So
We can
and
all agree on that. Let's keep thinking.
So I think the challenge for us is just to be more intentional and think critically about the nature of skill acquisition and how we transfer that in law schools and move that on to the professional environment, because I think that runway is getting shorter, but we still need that. Like we still need to learn how to build these brick by brick before you can like manage all the brick layers, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. How are we going to become carpenters, I
Yeah,
guess, right?
you have to start out we're very much like a guild kind of apprenticeship model, and so those early sort of apprenticeship tasks are still important, but the external pressures from people like being willing to pay law firms for their first year associates to learn that runway is shortening or going away. And so we have to just be much more intentional about what that looks like. And I don't have the answers to that. If I had the answers to that, we wouldn't need a lab. We wouldn't. Yeah. So a lot of what we
Right.
talk is just like we're trying to formulate what the right questions are, what the right benchmarks are, and answer those questions over time. Because I mean, the technology is part of it, but especially like my co-director, Kat Moon, is particularly good at this. Like the technology is the hook, and what you really get is like a human-centered design, like nature of what it means to be a legal professional from a human aspect kind of questions. Like that's really the secret through line of a lot of what we do. And I would anticipate that continues going forward.
Well, with that in mind, in terms of what it is you actually do, can you tell us a little bit more about what is, in particular, why don't we start off with how are students involved with VAILL? What's that dynamic look like?
Yeah, so I mean, in these first 6 months, like we had been just sort of building out our curriculum a little bit, and so students have been taking part in some of the courses that we offer. AI and legal practice was kind of our first cornerstone course that I would say is like a kind of a 100 level. It's a little beyond 100 level. That again kind of runs the gamut from basic prompting to ethics to more policy oriented questions. And then we also have it will be a practicum in the fall. It exists a lot. There's some projects that we have developed this spring with several partners. And my co-director, Kat Moon, teaches a course called Legal Problem Solving, which has always been a course that she taught, but we should just say we're turning this into a VAILL AI course. And so they always would break students up into groups and assign them to match up with an external partner of some kind. And so through that, we partnered with the American Arbitration Association, Legal Aid of North Carolina, our Office of General Counsel here at Vanderbilt, and did more. So every project in some form had an AI component to it. Some of them, like with Legal Aid of North Carolina and American Arbitration Association, just amounted to like lending our legal expertise to help them fine tune models that they had, sort of chatbots that they had. So in the end, like you're kind of like, this is a good response, this isn't a good response, but you have to know a lot about the law to get to that yes or no, this is good, this is bad. And through that process, there's a lot of learning for our students that goes on. Like, yeah, at the end, yes, you're kind of just going yes or no, but you get to see sort of the guts of like, well, this is how a tool like this gets refined and developed and sort of critically evaluate, like, again, going out of that, logging on to the chatbot, ChatGPT, and just like playing around to like, these are more bespoke, fine-tuned ways of deploying this technology for specific legal tasks. And you get to kind of help these organizations develop those. Other ones, particularly some of the access to justice stuff, they're always kind of, yeah, it's cool to have a chatbot, but like what I really need help with is like intake, like just
Yeah.
it's like not nearly as exciting as like, is this the perfect legal answer? It's like, can we just like develop a phone tree that like helps me triage all the problems coming in? So some of the stuff we did there is very much workflow, and sometimes maybe the end result is some kind of AI solution. Maybe AI is used along the way, or maybe what we find also importantly is that like that's just not the appropriate technology for this solution, which is also super, super, super important.
Incredibly valuable. Yeah, I mean, I just think that the temptation right now to have everything look like a nail and treat AI like a hammer in all contexts is just pervasive and saying, "Oh, you got a problem? Put AI on it," right? It's like a
Yeah,
Windex from My Big Fat Greek Wedding for all those who remember that movie. But I think also it's so important to just get that experience of working with a client too in the context of AI. I mean, from an
yeah,
employability standpoint, my gosh, sign me up. Your students are going to be on the cutting edge of
yeah,
helping folks think about how to integrate these chatbots. And I know we have case studies abounding, but the example of, I believe it was Air Canada's chatbot that made a promise that was then
yeah,
held to be legally binding on
yeah.
the company. So those case studies, your students are going to be writing them soon, which is
Right.
incredibly exciting.
That's the hope, is to, yeah, give them some, because they learned a lot. Like they get put in front of like the Office of General Counsel or a bunch of burnt out legal aid attorneys. Like uh they get some real world feedback. Like that's great, but what I really just want is a Word document like, that helps me with this playbook.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm
So
curious,
yo, go
yeah,
ahead.
how in terms of Vale's mission, obviously there are so many instances in which we can think about how AI is going to be used for a profit motive or to benefit commercial entities. Why and to what extent are you all focused on this kind of legal services, legal aid component of it, really making sure we're thinking about some issues that are often put on the legal back burner because, to be honest, that's just not where the money is. So
Yeah.
why is that a part of your mission, and how are you making sure that's a part of your DNA?
I for for both of us, but particularly for my co-director, like she's been always through the lens of how can we use these tools to bring more legal services to people who need them. Um, that's again like the technology is the hook, but if you look in the background of like what we're really talking about, we are at a moment where we still get to make decisions and policy choices about who gets to have this technology, how it's deployed, and who gets access to it, that really, so even when I'm just like a lot of what we talk about, whether it's with our students, whether it's externally to the judiciary, to attorneys, to legal aid, is basic education about what these tools are and what they aren't, because that informs the policy choices that will later be made. So you have to do the basic education, and then you can get to advocacy, because it's just the potential, if we allow it, for these tools to, especially in legal aid, take it out of a one-to-one service model and potentially bring it into more of a one-to-many, it is profound. And that's not without risk, and it's not without problems. I'm not a utopian about this technology, but I want us to have an intelligent conversation about it before we cut it off. And I feel like we're already seeing some versions of this where we are cutting off or making bad policy reactionarily without understanding what it is we're regulating. Whether it's just like these judicial orders that we've seen come out where the way that they'll have defined AI is like, well, you couldn't like run a Google search. I couldn't go on Lexis and run a natural language search because you defined AI so broadly about what could and couldn't be used. And that's just like misunderstanding. Or what you will also hear, and this hasn't been always said out loud as much, but I will hear through back channels that not all of these orders, but some of them are shields against people who are they're worried about attorneys flooding with motions because you can write so many of them now. So you could just barrage the docket with a bunch of motions. So there is a version of that, but some of these are clearly not written that way. They were like misunderstanding the technology or just how it's different from other types of AI. And that's like a very basic thing, but it's not just an academic thing. Like that could have real policy choices for whether it's pro se, overly punitive to pro se litigants or to even legal aid folks. Because when you talk to, like, even again, kind of the law librarian side of me, I don't do reference anymore, but like you would have self-represented people come to the law library and you meet with them on the reference desk, or you talk to people who I was talking with a gentleman who's an attorney who like works a lot with people who are in prison and does advocacy on their behalf, and like the problems it's not that they ever don't have claims that they're trying to articulate. It's that their claims fall under the weight of bad writing or an inability to actually say what it is that's wrong. And so it's not like we need to expect them to craft a fully fleshed out legal research memo with perfect citations, but even the ability of a tool like this to just translate, like you're saying this, like probabilistically, I think like the real issue that's tied to a legal problem is probably this. It's just that alone, and then you take that, and then we'll do like a real legal research thing. But just that translation aspect alone, and the ability to access that could potentially be very profound. And we're not quite ready for that yet. Like, there's a lot of policy choices to be made along the way. But the potential is there. And I think this next generation of these tools, particularly, everything, whether this continues on forever, we don't know. But I think everybody who's much smarter than me about this seems to agree, like this next generation tools, when you add more compute, more data, the capabilities go up. And I think at least for whatever we call this next generation, we're going to see another leap. The ability of these tools to it'll be less about can it do it and more about, are we going to make the choice to allow it, or are we going to continue to build up our moat as a legal profession and sort of end it off? Because like you've for sure people here have seen the statistics of the Legal Services Corporation, where it's 92% of people who in the United States who have some kind of legal problem don't have access to legal help. So it's not about even taking away like work from lawyers. There's this whole untapped sort of legal market that we don't even recognize exists that is out there. And that's what we're talking about with a lot of this. And even for me, like maybe other people, I use this analogy a lot, but I grew up in a very like blue collar, middle class family, like not poor, but blue collar. And even to this day, in the back of my mind, Like when, like even though I worked at Cornell, I worked at Vanderbilt, I worked in legal education for a long time. There's still a piece of me in the back of my eyes, like I can't afford a lawyer. I can't afford an attorney. That's for rich people. That's something fancy
Yeah.
people. It still feels unattainable to me, even though it's not.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think too, it speaks to a broader orientation with this technology. I mean, so many of the justifications for, oh, we need to keep building out this new model or we need to keep experimenting is on the idea that it's going to serve some social good, right? That's the trade-off. Yes, we're introducing some risks, but the benefits are what make it worth it. And you all are actualizing that because I think it's hard right now. We see papers about, open AI might solve cancer or what, come up with a new protein that means you never have to eat again or whatever.
Yeah.
As horrible as that sounds. Um, all of those potential benefits are theoretically out there, but you all are giving voice to that and putting into action, which I think is really important. And in our prior conversation, you mentioned that even the state government seems to be interested in what you're up to. Is that still the case? They're keeping tabs on what consulting with you all on some of these important issues.
We have had conversations with them, but I mean, state government in Tennessee is well, a lot of state houses are interesting, but we're particularly interesting. So, we have met with some groups. I wouldn't say we're off and running, but that is definitely something that I am aggressively pursuing because I want we're actively speaking with a lot of judiciary groups, whether it's locally or not. But what I would like to do is get more in like the state house and do some basic education and advocacy because I'm sure you know Dan Lena. He's done a great job of doing that in Illinois, and I would like to do more of that here. We do our federal our government relations folks at Vanderbilt are actively trying to get us in places like that to have those
Nice.
conversations. Definitely a mission of ours for sure.
Okay, well, we've talked a little bit about the future of Vail, so I think I'm going to move on a little bit more and just have you hypothesize. And I'd love for some group questions to come in to the extent any of our attendees would like to ask questions. How what is your cause for alarm right now? If you were talking to a 1L and you were saying, all right, what is the future of the legal profession going to look like, let's say in 2027? What would your advice be to a 1L when it comes to how you're going to prepare for this new legal world, given the likely advances in AI?
There's a few things. Whether when it's 1Ls or law students in general, um, I've sensed just a lot of anxiety from them. Um, and some of it's warranted. I don't think like some jobs will just be replaced, right? I don't think it would be dishonest to say not, but I there's a lot of anxiety over like, do I need to be a prompt engineering expert? Do I need to, and I'm somebody I released yesterday a Coursera course that like largely deals with prompt engineering. But a lot of what I talk about in this course is it's way more art than science, and that you shouldn't be getting anxiety over like, is this one more? They think looking at is this one is it like a skill like I need to learn? I'm going to be left behind if I don't learn it. And I really from a technical perspective, I'm not super worried about that. My whole sort of thing with students and really anybody I come across, because I find this in older attorneys too, like the anxiety I sense in attorneys that are older is like, well, I'm just gonna retire because I can't keep up with this. And the first year students like, well, did I make a mistake? Like it's the same energy. And for both of those groups, it's like, don't be afraid of this stuff. Like the best thing you can do is just mess around, just play around with it for 10 and 12 hours. Don't even think about like working on it for legal tests, like get weird with it for a while and just see what it can do, because then you'll start to naturally figure out like what you can and can't use it for, and how it fits into your workflows. So there's just a lot of anxiety about where to start and like, am I going to be left behind if I'm not some kind of AI expert? Um, And I think just honestly, like a mindset of curiosity and creativity is all that's required, and while understanding the risks too, which is what we talk about a lot. So that's one, and then also just to think about this is the framework, and I talk about this in my Coursera course too. Is it's less about will AI replace a certain job or not a certain job. It's more like break your job down into a series of tasks and think about, well, what tasks do I do that are ripe for automation and which tasks will never be or unlikely to be automated in some way, even if you wanted them to be. So like anything dealing with confidentiality or negotiation or representing clients in court, like even if the tools were good enough to do that, like it's very unlikely and probably unwise that we would cede that to anything related to confidentiality to a large language model or to an AI system. So like thinking about those soft skills and those, like how do we develop those? How do we be more intentional and focus about developing our career and what it means to be a legal professional around those? And because like we didn't, most of us didn't get into law or go to law school to draft the same document over and over anyway, right? Um, so it's just being more intentional about how you develop your own skills and skill acquisition, which is on us as a law as legal law professors as well, thinking about things along those lines. And then as we had hinted at a little bit earlier before, I think there's a real danger, and we have to be intentional about this of having it be a replacement for our thinking rather than an augmenter of our thinking. And uh, um, when you're using these tools, it will be a temptation to have it just kind of do the thinking for you. And I think and fighting against that because again, the best and highest use, the most creative uses I see of these things are when you're already operating at an expert level, because then you can really uh, my colleague here at Vanderbilt, his name's Jules White, who does a prompt engineering course that's very popular, calls it kind of the exoskeleton for your mind. That's what these things can potentially be when used in their best ways. Their worst ways is when you just kind of cede all judgment, because one, even GPT-4, as cool as it is, it's just not good enough. Like it's not going to be good enough for that. Like there's a lot of good studies about knowledge work that it raises, if you're a bad performer, it raises you up to about average level. Like everybody gets to be average now. We're all doing it faster. If you're good though, like it may actually like bring you down a little bit. um those are the things I would focus on a lot. And then
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so
think
no,
that's a great.
yeah, those are the ones.
Yeah, it's a great list too, because the other area that at least I'm optimistic about is we will agree as a society that there are certain tasks we just don't want AI to be used for. So, for
Right.
example, the creation of some wills, you could imagine, maybe this is this, or a trust, something that's so personal. Maybe you don't want someone to say, well, I used Chat GPT 5, here you go.
Yeah,
Thanks, have a great day, or a closing argument or something like that. Maybe folks want to see and will even pay extra for your ability to be kind of still thinking, still coming up with your own
yeah.
creativity.
Well, and particularly for our like students at like Vanderbilt who are going into, mostly AM law 200 and 100, we're going into big law. That's what most of, but a lot of what you're selling there is relationships. Like I know everybody at this agency and I know who does what and how what their mode of operation is. Um, that's not going away. That's like not going to be replaced by that's what you sell. But like how do we get our students, that's the question. It's like, well, you don't come out of law school with those relationships, so how do you get from there to there, and what does that look like, and who pays for it? Because it's
Always a question. Yes. Well,
yeah.
I want to make sure that I leave some time. I could keep talking with you for hours, but
I was
I'm
like,
sure
well,
we'll do
yeah,
that
sorry, I
in
ramble a
another
lot,
trade.
so
No, no, this is great. So I just want to pause briefly. I know Rebecca had a question about what courses you all have actually launched, but I believe that was answered. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca. Any other attendees, now's the time. If you've got some questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put them in the chat. Um, if there are no questions, I'll just keep going with my own, and I will interrupt myself if I see any movement from the guests. But Mark, I would appreciate your insights on. I asked you to speak to 1Ls and students generally. If you were speaking to a dean at another law school, what's your pitch to them? Why should they try to start or emulate something like VAILL?
I think it's just because you get to create a generation of students that are going to potentially be leaders at their firms, at their bar associations. You're trying to create a baseline level of literacy for this technology that's about to pervade every aspect of computing and society. And so baseline technology competence is a requirement in 40 states, and generative AI is no exception to that. So you're pretty much obligated to address this somewhere along the way. And because the big thing for me is like we've already seen students who are graduating out of here, like it's a great way to get on like a tech policy committee or a working group, or whether it's at a large firm that you wouldn't have those ends to develop those expertise so quickly if you weren't if it was another subject. But I think right now maybe it still feels obligatory, but it's going to not feel obligatory here very soon, because it's not just we focus on AI for legal services, but they're going to be working both with and for people who are dealing with AI issues. So it's just yeah. Right now there's still a choice, and I would make the choice now while there is one,
Yes.
because
Well,
soon there
and I
will.
think it's yeah, I mean, there's such a huge obligation not only on each attorney per the model rules, right, to stay tech literate, but also on the academy, in my opinion, to press pause and say, how are we going to make sure we're preparing students for the legal profession they're going to enter? So I think hopefully we will begin to see this become more and more a part of every single course, and something that all students feel like they can embrace and tackle. So with that, we've covered our tips for students. We've covered our tips for schools. Let's see. I will pitch just one more time if anyone has any open questions. See if anything's top of mind for folks. It's looking like folks are looking forward to the weekend, which is totally understandable. I get it. It's a Friday.
Understandable.
Yes. Well, Mark, I guess one final question, and this is a little outside the box, so feel free to handle this as you'd like. When you think about the biggest risks from AI, we've seen that some people are more focused on the short-term risks, generally thinking about algorithmic bias, for example, mis and disinformation usually get put into that category, versus some of those longer-term risks about things like um, severe disruptions to our political order and just severe disruptions as a result of things like increased cyber attacks. Where are you on that spectrum? I'm not saying you've got to put yourself in one camp or another, but what extent do you wake up in the middle of the night, besides from your kids, with a nightmare
Mostly
situation?
that.
What causes you a little bit to sweat at all, if anything, about some of those AI risks?
Um, so I guess, yeah, I do try to be more in that pragmatic lane because, as we said, like there is, and rightfully so, like we're gonna have a very weird election year. I don't think you have to be an AI expert I mean, we already have, and uh, things will go wrong. So I'm not dismissing, issues of bias, of the intellectual property sort of issues that we're bringing on, and some of the other sort of long-term sort of risk that they were talking about. But I feel like that is covered. Like everybody's mind goes to that. A lot of people are thinking about that. And then there's the sort of the other spectrum of like this is all hype. This doesn't work. This is what I wish there was more of us kind of in the middle. It's like it's not all gloom and doom, and it's not hype. Like, I just know how it helps me every day. And I would like to see more nuanced conversation captured around that, because I do worry whether it gets too hyped or we're too afraid of it. We are going to cut out some pretty incredible opportunities in the middle for some of the legal services delivery that we've talked about, for just everyday knowledge work that, if we do it right, and frankly, I'm cynical, we won't do it right, but I'm here to try to fight the fight that we will do it right, can actually just make us more human than ever, and focus on the things and aspects of our work that are the most human and the most enjoyable. Will it work out that way? Again, I'm not a utopian. I'm here, I know how it helps me and has enhanced my quality of life. But that is what I worry most about, and why we have a lab, is to let's also like remind ourselves like what the potential for this technology is to do great things. All while, because I mean, it is scary, and things will go wrong. I'm not looking forward to this election and some of the implications that AI will have because of that. And for all kinds of reasons that we can't even anticipate. But I just worry we're going to cut ourselves off from the conversation that could potentially be more positive, because we are so focused on those other aspects. I don't know if that makes
Yeah,
sense at all, but
I think we're gonna have to coin a new the Williams paradox of even will make us even more human. I love that. That is a great notion and a great idea, and really a good call for everyone to say, hey, this is the time to look at those things we've neglected or pushed to the side because we said it was too hard or too complex or whatever. And that's where this could potentially be most valuable. But what a great message on a Friday. And thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time and all the work you're
thank
doing
you.
at VAILL. I know that a lot of folks, myself included, will be watching what you all do very closely. And a lot of folks will raise their hand, like myself, to say, if we can help out, let us know. But otherwise, thank you again for coming to Chat GPT, or excuse me, Lunch GPT. I guess I was a little too on the nose with my puns there. And thank you to everyone who came and attended today. We'll have another Lunch GPT session next Friday. So stay tuned for that registration link. And I hope everyone has a great weekend ahead.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. See you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.